Hey everyone, it's me again. I just wanted to follow up really quickly on my video from the other day about the SAE racist chant controversy at the University of Oklahoma. In the days since this news broke, I've been getting into a lot of debates on the subject naturally, mainly on Facebook, but also elsewhere on the internet. And a few arguments keep coming up, and I wanted to address those really quickly. Whenever I point out to people that as a matter of constitutional law, there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment right to free speech, I always get the same bag of arguments back in response. One of those arguments is that the president of the university, and this is something he himself said, has a legal duty imposed by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to make sure that the university does not create a hostile environment for minority students on campus. And so, as a result of that duty, he had to expel these students. I beg to differ. First of all, I don't think you could actually show that that chant was creating a hostile environment on the University of Oklahoma campus. Remember that the students were singing that chant on a private bus en route to a private party. Now, one of the students who was on the bus obviously filmed that disgraceful and despicable chant, and then sent it to another student group, which then posted it to the internet. So the students who were singing the chant, didn't know that this was going to end up going public, and it wasn't being done. It wasn't being sung to anyone in particular, certainly not to any minority students on campus in particular. It was being done in private on a bus with apparently no non-white students on it, and it wasn't being targeted specifically at anyone in particular. So this is not the kind of threat that falls under any kind of exception to the First Amendment. There is a true threat exception to the First Amendment, but that entails a threat that's directed at specific people, which this particular incident does not actually satisfy. In any case, when it comes to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, people need to keep in mind, legislation cannot trump the Constitution. So if there's a provision of the Civil Rights Act that ends up violating First Amendment rights, then it's not enough simply to say, oh, well, the Civil Rights Act required the president to do such and such. That's not sufficient, because at the end of the day, the Constitution is the highest law of the land. All other laws, we can have no other laws before it, if you will. At the end of the day, all other laws, including statutes like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, have to be compatible with the Constitution. Now, I don't think that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act actually violates the First Amendment in and of itself. But I do think that the president's action in expelling these two students in this particular case did violate the First Amendment. And even if he can cite the Civil Rights Act, Title VI specifically, in support of his decision, then that would simply mean that this particular application of that law was unconstitutional. So the law itself would not necessarily be unconstitutional, but this application of it would. This action that the president took in expelling the students would violate the Constitution. Another argument that I heard was that the university has a code of conduct that probably, requires students who agree to enroll there not to engage in this kind of bigoted activity, and so if they do so, they're breaking the rules of the university, and so the university is within its rights to expel them. No, absolutely not. A public university is a government institution. That means it is bound by the Constitution. The Supreme Court has made clear that when it comes to free speech specifically, if anything, public universities are the milieus, the environments where we would expect the right to free speech to get the highest level of protection, not a lower level of protection than what you would see in society at large. Based on that premise, I would say very confidently that a public university cannot make admitted applicants waive their constitutional rights, such as their right to free speech, as a condition of enrolling at the university. They're not allowed to force you to do that as part of the contract that you sign when you agree to become a student at the university. They are required, as a matter of constitutional law, to respect the free speech and other constitutional rights of their students. So the last point I really want to make very quickly is that a lot of the folks I get into debates with on this subject online and elsewhere keep making these arguments without actually citing any legal authority to back them up. Now, these are folks who, and I can tell this because I always throw down a gauntlet and challenge them. I always say, look, I went to law school, I graduated from law school, and while I was there, I actually took a seminar in First Amendment law. So I actually know a thing or two about this area of constitutional law. Do you? And the people I challenge on that basis never have a comeback for me. I have yet to hear anyone come back at me by saying, yes, you know, I actually am a lawyer or a judge or a legal clerk or, you know, a law student. The people who make these arguments tend not to actually have any expertise in this area. So what people need to understand is that if you're going to make arguments about whether or not this action was constitutional, namely the expulsion of these two students, you know, you have to cite some kind of legal authority to back up your argument. Now, I understand people who didn't go to law school wouldn't know that off the top of their heads, but I mean, think about it. How are you going to make arguments about whether something is constitutional or not without even thinking of researching Supreme Court precedent, for example? It's as if that hasn't even occurred to the people with whom I've gotten into these arguments. It's like it hasn't even crossed their minds to actually do some research and do their homework and find out what the state of the law is in this area. To me, that's just unconscionable. Even if you didn't go to law school, common sense alone should tell you that, you know, this is an area of high specialization and you need to do some degree of research into it before you can pass judgment on it one way or the other. So that's the message I want to send to everyone really quickly and clearly. Hello, at least conduct some kind of research into First Amendment free speech law before you start running your mouths on the subject, whether on the internet or anywhere else. Capiche? Get it? Got it? Good. Can you dig it? I knew that you could. See y'all later.